This is Chapter 5, Environmental Systems and Ecosystem Ecology. This case study is very important. It is about the Chesapeake Bay oyster industry. It collapsed due to a couple of reasons. Due to overharvesting. Overharvesting is like overfishing, but since oysters are not fish, we call it overharvesting. Habitat destruction, disease, and the most important for this chapter is nutrient pollution, our nutrients being nitrogen and phosphorus. So if we have excess amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus in our bodies of water, it can create something called a dead zone. And the reason why there would be excess amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus are if we're using agricultural fertilizers, if there's animal manure or poop. So how we raise livestock nowadays is we will put thousands of animals in one place, and so this becomes an issue because manure has a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and bacteria in it as well. And then stormwater runoff is runoff from streets and driveways. So detergents that are in soaps can have a lot of phosphorus in them. And so if you're washing your car, then that can run off and also could help create a dead zone. This dead zone talks about the Chesapeake Bay, which is on the East Coast, but the largest dead zone in the US, the one that you really need to know, is close to us. It's in the Gulf of Mexico. And the reason why the dead zone is so large there is because the Mississippi River drains into the Gulf of Mexico, and the Mississippi River drains half of the United States. So all of that agricultural land in the Midwest, all of that fertilizer, manure, all the stormwater runoff from all the rivers are going to lead to, or most of the rivers in the U.S. are going to lead to the Mississippi River. And so this is very important. Also on this page, no watershed, hypoxia as well. Hypoxia is on the next page. 104. So negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops. Feedback loops are occur as a response to a change in a system. So a negative feedback loop, even though it doesn't sound like it, it's good. That is because it reverses a problem and brings that problem back and brings that system back to homeostasis. So an example of a negative feedback loop is, and our body has several negative feedback loops. Our body is kind of a self-sustaining system, like the earth. When it gets too hot, our body responds to that by sweating, and then it cools off. So it's bringing our body back to being the correct temperature. And there's other negative feedback loops in our body, but positive feedback loops are the opposite. They're bad, especially in environmental science, because it's going to drive a problem further. An example is right here. So this is a normal system. In a cool climate, sunlight and heat is going to reflect off of white or light surfaces. So it's going to keep the area a little cooler, especially this water down here. But because of climate change, as it gets warmer, the sea ice will melt and it's going to expose these dark surfaces. Dark surfaces actually absorb heat and light, and so it's going to make that warmer and warmer and warmer, and more ice is going to melt. It's going to make that warmer because more light is going to be absorbed. So it's a system that keeps moving away from this homeostasis, from stability. So other examples of positive feedback loops are erosion. When soil is eroded, the soil loosens up and it makes the problem worse. Cancer cells will increase exponentially, and it's the same thing with human population growth. Population will increase exponentially. So if you have 2 kids, those 2 kids may have 2 kids. So you start with 1 person, you end up with 4. Those 4 humans may have more humans, and so that is also a positive feedback loop. So know this, figure and caption. The Earth is a self-regulating complex system that maintains homeostasis. This is just kind of a concept that you should know, just like the human body does. The Earth will bounce back if it leaves homeostasis. So no runoff and watershed. This is a watershed right here, the Chesapeake Bay watershed. A watershed is an area of land where all of the rivers, the streams will dump or flow into a common body of water. So all the green right here, anything that's over here will be brought here eventually. So if there is a river, stream, if an industry is dumping some hazardous waste and it rains, that may run off into the Chesapeake Bay. This is showing dissolved oxygen content in the Chesapeake Bay in 2014. Fish need a dissolved oxygen concentration of 3 milligrams per liter, or 3 parts per million. And parts per million this basically means 3 parts of oxygen per a million parts of water. And this varies. So some fish have a lower tolerance, some fish have a higher tolerance, some fish can tolerate 2 milligrams per liter of oxygen. It really depends, but if they go lower than their tolerance, if they get less oxygen, then they can die, or they will die. So how does a hypoxic or dead zone actually occur? And you can see right here, there's 0 milligrams per liter. So this is the dead zone right here. There's low amounts of oxygen right here. So how does that occur? It occurs by a process called eutrophication. This is very, very, very important. You need to know this entire process. Also memorize this caption. It's the same process, just a visual depiction. So eutrophication occurs with fertilizers or manure or urban sewage. So urban sewage is when you wash your hands, when you flush the toilet, that sewage, that's urban sewage. We have in the United States the Clean Air Act, which prohibits any sewage from being dumped in bodies of water, but there can be leaks, and in other countries they don't have that regulation, that act, usually in poorer countries, so that can also contribute. And these are all things that are high in nitrogen or phosphorus. So when plants don't absorb all of these nutrients, then whatever's left on the surface, when it rains, it'll be washed into rivers, lakes, or oceans. And phytoplankton, or algae, will multiply and make copies of themselves, and that's called an algae bloom. And the reason why they bloom is because the same reason why plants love nitrogen and phosphorus, because they can grow. Same thing, they get nutrients, so they grow a lot, and then they will die. They'll die because either they run out of nutrients, or when there is an algae bloom, the water gets really cloudy and green and turbid, so it will block, the sun will be blocked for those plants that are lower, so they'll die and they will decompose. Now, algae actually contributes to oxygen, so it adds dissolved oxygen in the water, but the bacteria that decompose, they cellular respire, and they consume these dead algae and these dead phytoplankton, and in doing that, they need to use up oxygen. So they're going to use up all the dissolved oxygen, and that's what's going to create that dead zone. There's not enough oxygen, and the fish will die. Fish, shrimp, and that's what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico. There's miles of water where there are no fish. Shrimp are dying, and that's bad, especially for fishermen and for our food source. So know this figure and caption. This is the same process, but it helps you see it visually. So this is very, very important. It's always on the AP test. I'm 98.5% sure it's going to be on this next year's AP test as well. Know lithosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere, and ecosystem. So on page 111, this is gross primary productivity. Excuse me. So gross primary productivity is the total energy made by autotrophs when they photosynthesize. So when producers or autotrophs are photosynthesizing, they are creating chemical energy. That's the total chemical energy that they're making. Net primary productivity is take this energy and take out the energy that plants need to metabolize, so to respire and to create ATP. And it's the energy that's left over that's in their biomass. So biomass is like tissue or their body. So we have biomass. Our body is our biomass. All living organisms, their bodies are their biomass. So it's that energy that's in their biomass that's available to consumers. And it's about 10%. Remember that when we learned about trophic levels, 90% of energy gets lost to the environment as heat. So only 10% is available to the next trophic level. So they only get 10% of that energy, and that's what the net primary productivity is. Productivity in general is the rate, so how fast the energy is converted to biomass through photosynthesis. So it's kind of the speed. And NPP, so net primary productivity, increases on land with temperature and precipitation. So if it's hot, if it's rainy, like a tropical rainforest, there's going to be more productivity, more of that biomass. And in the ocean, if there's light, a lot of light and nutrients. So if there's a lot of upwelling happening, then there's going to be more nutrients. So that's going to be happening more near the coasts. This figure and caption is important. This is showing the productivity in different biomes. So if you look here, desert and desert shrub, they get a lot of sun, a high temperature, but they don't have much precipitation. And if you look in the aquatic ecosystem, the open ocean doesn't get as much upwelling, so there's not as much nutrient availability. So and when you get deeper in the ocean, there's not as much light either, so that's a lower productivity. Higher productivity is algae beds and reefs, the aquatic, and then terrestrial tropical rainforest has a high productivity. Okay, something that's not in your book. Aquatic photosynthesis is a little bit different. It's the same process, but the light differs from terrestrial or land. Red light is only absorbed in the top 1 meter of water, and then blue light reaches about 100 meters. So these lights have different wavelengths, sizes, and so they're only able to pass through a certain distance of water. So aquatic plants have had to have adaptations to help with this. All right, that's all for now, and we will continue next time.